let's see here. Okay. And beginning. Oops. And oh, I have to do Zoom, screen share, share screen. Work. Let me know if this is working for you. Okay, so far it's looking good.
Good.
And we'll do it from the beginning. Okay, great. And please ask questions as we go along. Um, know that, and I'll try and talk a bit about my background as we go through this. Um, so I'm going to talk about history and processes around sustainability, climate, and ESG finance. And then I'll have a short case study on plastics and petrochemicals. That gives an example of the type of work that I have led. And then I'm also going to talk about a model called values, interests, careers, and jobs. And Pasang, so you want to write down that acronym VICJ, if you write that down on your notes right now. It's probably the most important thing they'll see today. Interestingly, Stephen has another model that he has been lecturing on that's also very useful. So by background, I'm Gabriel Toomey. I'm the CEO of Responsible Alpha. I'm not going to read the slides. I will want you to read the slides yourself as I talk through them. Here's just an agenda. Now, here's my background. In the 1980s, as I presented on Blaze, I led a student group and we raised $30,000 and bought an ambulance and drove it down to Mexico from Minnesota where I lived and gave it to a town because that was sustainable development at the time. Okay. And so I went door knocking, singing Baila La Bamba to make money that eventually ended up being the $30,000. We did not make that door knocking. I made $40 the first night. But that was sustainable development back in the 80s. Then in the early 1990s, I spent a couple of years on and off working in the North Atlantic, look at analyzing ocean health as an oceanographic research assistant, and that included analyzing plastic waste. Then I spent about 5 years, the first two on and off, and then full time as an art history consultant in the 1990s. Then I pivoted to working in the capital markets in 2000, and I have not looked back. In 2000, I worked in bond trading at Wells Fargo, and then I was a banker for banks at Wells Fargo for a long time. But immediately within about a year and a half, I got the sustainability bug. I didn't become a full-time sustainability analyst or research manager until 2006. So I've been a sustainability research manager basically about 20 years now, and I've worked in about 35, 40 countries around the world, everywhere from Malaysia and Indonesia to all over Europe and Latin America. And I have a global network, and I've looked at any number of issues for any number of clients and worked with clients such as the Japanese financial FSA, financial, it's their version of the SEC. Sorry, I'm blanking on the acronym. To the Norges Bank, which is and the Council of Ethics, which is governing the investments of 1.3% of the world's equities, which is a Norwegian government pension fund, to BlackRock, to working with indigenous leaders in Latin America on ways to improve due diligence on carbon offset projects and looking at social finance issues. So this is me. I'm Hispanic and Arab from Latin America, and I'm a consortium fellow. You may have heard of the Consortium for Graduate Study and Management. I'm also previously received funding from the National Society of Hispanic MBAs. Responsible Alpha takes diversity, equity, inclusion extremely seriously. Stephen and I were sort of joking yesterday that I think 100% of our board, or if we include Neil, who's Jewish, is diverse. So there you go. And it's mostly women and non-binary, and that's the world I believe in. And there we go. And everybody at our company, right, Responsible Alpha, is an owner of the firm. That's how you create a model where you have a company that supports the transition to low carbon, sustainable, and equitable future. You give people ownership. It's incredibly important for the 5 of you to have ownership of where you're going to work, because that's very different than just getting an hourly rate. And we offer 2 services, which I'll talk a little bit later, but I'm want you to read the screens. We're a little over a year old because the first year was just sort of trying to get things done. So we're a little over a year old. And yeah, we worked with clients like Standard Chartered Bank, Nestle, Vera, Walton Family Foundation, and many others. Our projects right now include we're writing a book on green bonds for the Inter-American Development Bank. And we hope, we don't know if we'll get a contract, but we're very close to getting a contract. I'd say it's 50% to design an ecosystem restoration bond for the US government to work to restore large parts of the Great Plains, which would be extraordinary, extraordinary. Our team has First Nation and tribal leaders in our board, and we take the concept of planetary health extremely seriously. We have a significant sustainability commitment that's probably like 5 pages long if you printed it out. It's on our website. So we walk the walk and talk the talk as much as we can. To do that as a CEO, one has to embrace humility each day and be willing to be wrong. It's a key talking point. You need to look for where you want to work. Will your manager be openly wrong about things, right? Will they embrace humility? Because we're entering a time where sustainability and specifically, or more specifically, ESG metrics themselves as are measures of much greater volatility that we're going to be experiencing economically as we go through the transition, whether we like it or not. It's going to happen, the transition to a low carbon, sustainable, and equitable future. So systems are changing and they're going to be forced to change. And when systems are forced to change, you get huge swings in how society functions. And therefore, you want to look for leadership when you work at an institution that's willing to embrace that. So when we think of sustainability, this is a leave behind, but the first thing you need to know about is that sustainability and climate risk, specifically, we've had consensus from a natural resource science and earth science perspective since 1979 that the climate is changing. But notice the vocabulary. I said the climate is changing. I did not say that the climate is changing 100% due to human activities. That portion of it, where that it's anthropogenic, now has been consensus since 2021. If you use the benchmark of the IPCC report. But it was in 1979 that the World Meteorological Organization had an emergency meeting on the called the World Climate Summit that said, oh my God, the climate's changing. What are we going to do about it? And we've known that the climate has been changed. We've known about climate change since the 1820s. It's been 200 years. So it's old, right? But now I'll let you read the rest of the screen. Now, from a metrics perspective, you need to understand, this is the first set of vocabulary. There's metrics, which for ESG, which are indicators for GRI, and can be indicators for SDGs, which I'll talk about in a second. But there's metrics, there's scores, there's pillars. And then when you compare a score or pillar with another organization, it's a rating. Okay, be very careful how you use the nouns. It will distinguish you from your peers. Does that make sense, Pasang? Get a nod?
I'm going to need you to repeat that.
Well, you have metrics, ESG metrics.
Yeah.
Which can be scores. I can combine I can put 2 or more scores together, however I wish. I can create metrics together. I can create a score.
Mm-hmm.
So I can take a metric would be number of people on the board of directors. A score would be what's the board quality, the quality of the board of directors, which would be a combination of diversity, tenure, and number of people. Right. Then that can become a pillar, which would be like environment, social governance are considered pillars. And then let's say I want to compare my company with your company, that's a rating. So it's important to understand the details. Now, structurally, sustainability is very broad and ESG is very thin, which you'll be very clear very quickly here. Now, these are the SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals. There are 232 indicators and 17 goals and 168 targets, okay? Now, what's important to know here is that the 17 goals across the top, they were co-designed with industry so it's a public-private sector partnership that put this together. That's absolutely critical to understand that, Amar, okay? Because this was not it wasn't put together one day and industry's like, where did this come from? Industry participated in the construction of the process, and this was launched in 2015. Now, what you'll notice here is that, Amar, do you see there's green, yellow, red on the screen? Can you read that? So the green is like where there's consistent government metrics that might be applicable. Orange is there's inconsistent, but there may be some consistency in government metrics. And red is there no consistency or no metrics. So if you look at something like, let's just pick a random one. Oh, I can't, I've heard, clean water and sanitation. The goal is number 6. You'll see one of the red ones is, and I can't read my own screen, treated wastewater. So we don't have consistent metrics for treated wastewater to compare across countries. So again, what you need to understand from the SDG perspective, Sustainable Development Goals, they're very broad, but we do not always have consistent metrics for comparison. There's a lot of subjectivity. ESG, the metrics are all the same globally. Does that make sense, Amar? And ESG is very thin. Okay. Now I'm going to talk about that. Can you actually analyze a portfolio using SDGs? You're jumping right into advanced climate finance here, okay? Because you're smart. You're going to do great. And Will, I trust you, Will. You got this. So here, you can because we don't have consistency on the metrics for SDGs, the best we can do for SDGs is this model here by Nuveen, the asset manager, which is owned by TIAA. So Will, you can see the best you can do for an asset management perspective is assets under management and the number of impacted holdings. There's 2 categories. You see that? Because it's very difficult to run a portfolio when you look at number, what was it, 6 here, clean water and sanitation, treated wastewater, if treated wastewater is not a consistently reported metric. And are these questions coming in? Wonderful. Oh, it's great. Stephen, great. Yeah, keep the questions coming. Any questions at this point? Now,
Gonna say,
yeah,
I was surprised to hear that SDGs are not well, like the parameters are not well managed or defined because
fine.
it's set by the UN. I would think that ESGs would be the same. SDGs would be the same globally rather than ESGs.
Great. SDGs are qualitative and an example of an SDG would be, does the institution support and promote diversity in women in management? Right? How do we score that? Is that yes, no? Is that percentage? So Barika, how do we know? The company puts as a policy that says, yes, we support women in diversity in management. Is it a policy that you have to check off that an analyst has to find in their annual report? That's very different than an ESG metric that say the percentage of women in management are 18% versus, that's my company because I'm a horrible global capitalist and Steven's like percentage of women in management, his company is 70%. Well, who's winning the battle there? It's Steven. You see what I'm saying? Rika?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's clear. Thank you.
Yeah, no, it's that type of thing. And it's a great question, Barika, because what happens is the SDGs do not form fit with GRI, which is a standardized reporting matrix for how companies report. And they themselves, neither of them form fit into ESG. Yet, everybody globally will be saying, well, if you see a journalist, a CEO, NGO, they'll replace ESG, sustainability, and GRI, and they'll confuse metrics, indicators, targets, goals, ratings, scores, and pillars. And then everyone's left really confused. So they're not talking. So that's why I'm really glad you asked that question, because if you're able to get some of that knowledge today, it'll make you a stronger professional.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
I have a quick question too. On the next slide, what is the like when you're talking about the funds, number of impact holdings? What is these numbers are under what? I couldn't tell. Like what is 7 affordable and clean energy assets under management?
Oh, okay, yeah, that's referring to 7 billion of assets under
Okay,
management,
billion. Okay, got you.
and the number of funds, right? So so Amar, you're graduated from the program, and you're an associate, not an analyst, because you've already graduated from a post, a graduate level program at TIAA, and you have to score, you know, assets under management for affordable and clean energy. And TIAA is invested in a Exelon. If you know do you know Exelon, the nuclear utility, out of Indiana and Illinois, Exelon, right? You're told, okay, can I put where does our $1 billion investment in Exelon, which is most of their energy generation comes from uranium, is that going to affordable and clean energy? Yes or no? You have 10 minutes to make a decision on that. What would you say, Amar?
Sorry, I couldn't really hear you. I'm in a big headquarters
Oh,
right
okay.
now.
Okay.
You might have to ask someone else.
Okay, I'm gonna ask you, Sanhita, is that okay? There's no right or wrong here, okay? You have to look at Exelon, who's a nuclear utility in the United States, and you've invested $1 billion in them. Do they go into the affordable and clean energy category?
I'll answer. I'm gonna say no because they've put so much into their nuclear energy. They're gonna be upset because you're now asking them to invest. Unless there's like potentially down the road, they know that they're going to have a lot of tax or tariffs that are going to be applied to them. It's going to be really hard to make a case for it.
So the analyst in your role as an associate, not an analyst, pardon me again, would you make an argument that that's defensible based on a set of metrics that would support an inclusion or an exclusion? And that's very difficult to do because you have to do it, let's say, in 20 minutes. When you first start as an associate, you might have a day to make a decision. But once you start working on a trading floor or an asset management, you have 20, 30, 40 minutes to make decisions. And then it has to be based on a methodology, right? I covered nuclear, Barika, at Calvert Investments. And one of the hardest things I had to learn to do is I started my job as an anti-nuclear person. That was the language and the dogma I had been taught. And I ended up having to rank 101 nuclear reactors in the United States and designed a ranking methodology that had a 2-week time leg on it to do a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 ranking from 5 being best, 1 being worst for all the reactors. And then I had to map all the reactors up to who were the publicly traded companies that were invested in them, and see if they were see if we could put them into our investable universe. Not that we would invest in them, but that we would consider to invest in them. When the whole ESG team was anti-nuclear, and I do that based on long-term U.S. Studies around the safety nuclear. It took 18 months, and it changed my opinion. That that's very hard to do. So that's the type of thing you have to do as an associate. Okay, does that make sense? Because often we don't know the answer.
My one question was, are those categories set by, so are those SDG categories, affordable and clean energy, sustainable cities and communities, are
Yes.
those? Yeah, okay.
Yep.
Because my initial thought when you said nuclear was, well, I don't know, depends what you consider clean energy.
Yeah, no, exactly, right? And it doesn't mean, do I have that same opinion today as a professional? I don't know. But as an associate, you're going to have to make decisions that are very difficult. So Pasang, I once had to make a decision on how many fatalities would exclude a company from being in the cement that we could invest in that was in the cement industry. I mean, on the one hand, it's absurd to say, I go to work to die, to be blunt, and not to be crude, and not to marginalize or make light of a horrible tragedy. But is it that there are fatalities each year at a cement company? Or is it that was there one set of fatalities because someone drove off a cliff and 26 people died? Yet that company has a very strong climate policy and is actively decreasing their emissions. What do you do on that, Passam? What would you do?
Yeah, I guess I would take an objective stance. I would look holistically in the industry what the average casualties are, and then try to take an objective stance.
I agree, right? But then from we
Yeah,
live
as a
in
human,
a world that's fair and equitable.
yeah.
I mean, the answer sort of should be zero, right?
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
let me know, Stephen, if we're getting a little bit into the details, but this is the type of questions you'd have to answer as an associate, as a sustainability associate, okay? The next slide is some general knowledge about climate, which hopefully you can read at home. The key thing to know here is that, so Will, if someone says, well, first thing is the two following bullets. Climate change is measured in which unit of time, 1 day or 30 years?
30 years, because it's
30 years.
been,
Okay, good,
yeah.
good. Thank you. You may not have known that, but good guess. You had 50% chance. Okay, so weather is measured in which unit? We'll call it, 6 weeks, 1 day, or 30 years. Will.
Weather, you said 60 days or 30 years?
No, 6 weeks or
Oh,
30 years.
weather, I feel like it's more frequent, so 6 weeks. Yeah.
So when someone observes the weather and says it's hot today, there's no climate change, that technically is a non sequitur. That's a sentence that does not make sense. So when we see these measurements here on these figures, climate changes, we measure that over 30 years, right? Now, so that's the first bullet. The second bullet is the quantity of data. Where do you live, Will?
Chicago.
Chicago. So yesterday was maybe, I'm making it up, 52 degrees Fahrenheit. I don't know, more or less, right? So that's a single point in time. So the parallel is, if I'm asking you the price on Microsoft stock yesterday, I'm like, what's the value of Microsoft since inception? Has its stock price gone up since 1983 when it first launched, right? And you say, it was 52 degrees yesterday. It was, I don't know, $110 yesterday. You're like, no, what's the contribution? That's the difference between weather and climate, okay? Climate, think of since inception for a stock, and weather, think of a single tick, a ticker price, a tick price, okay? Now that gives you, when you look at the quantity of data that goes into measuring climate, we're talking, there's millions of data points each day that are measured by satellites globally. And for any number of categories of measurement, sea level rise, the increase in ocean temperature down to 2,000 meters, disappearing glaciers, Antarctic and Arctic sea ice decline, okay? It's not a single data point. All right, now going to the next thing, have you looked at TCFD? I got some nods. Okay,
No,
some
we
heat.
Probably some aware, but we haven't had a deep dive into it.
Okay, okay. So basically TCFD 2015, if you step back, was the years the sustainability industry changed. 3 things happened, right? So Sanhita, I'll tell you what the 3 things are. The first thing is the SDGs were launched, Sustainable Development Goals, okay? The Paris Agreement was launched. And Mark Carney, who was the governor of the Bank of England, gave his famous speech at the to the insurers, and I always forget, it was a September 22nd or September 29th. I remember at the end of his speech, people were texting me live saying, oh my God, our industry changed. Because up to that point, literally, sustainability was an outsider to insider model, right? Now, when you have the SDGs adopted, the Paris Agreement adopted, and climate finance being led by the Bank of England, it's now an insider model. It doesn't mean enough is happening. I'm not saying it is. I'm just saying the power structure around sustainability has changed. Now, as a result, the Bank of England and others got together through the Financial Stability Board to launch the TCFD, the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosure. That's now been absorbed into the IFRS, which is International Financial Reporting System, which is International Accounting Standards. What you need to understand here is that there's transition risks and physical risks. And that what you need to know is the definitions of that's on the left here. You have in physical risks, you have acute and chronic. Acute is a storm, and chronic is sea level rise. Sea level rise, we can measure it over time. A storm, we don't know when it's going to occur. And the transition risks are policy, legal, technology, market, and reputation, all of which can include stranded assets. We'll talk a little bit about that going forward, okay? If you want to talk more about this offline, for those who have not worked on TCFD, we can always have another call. That'd be just a real honor to do that, okay? How are we doing? Is this interesting for you so far? I got one thumbs up. Okay, that's great. I'll deal with that. So here's how you calculate on the right climate risk. It's qualitatively, and I need to move the screen over. So climate risk is financial risk, and it can have both physical and transition risk. Remember the two categories here, physical and transition risk. You have transition risk in light blue and physical risk in light blue, okay? So what happens is you can calculate climate risk, which is financial risk, at two levels. You see, Sanhita, you can do it at the asset level or the facility level. I mean, asset level, which is facility, or the corporate level. So we can just read across with me. So there's a chronic physical risk of rising sea levels, right? SLR is the acronym, sea level rise. At the facility level. So I have a manufacturing plant 1 foot above sea level in Florida. So it's in a hazard zone. So the hazard is the chronic risk is sea level rise. That's the hazard. It's in the category physical risk. It's at the facility level. That's the exposure. And the vulnerability is how they mitigate that. So do they have a flood pump in the facility? You can calculate all this out and you come up with a price for climate risk. Conceptually, there's a little bit more math involved. Does that make sense to you? Okay, but then we can do the same thing at the corporate level. This facility that you're managing in Florida is owned by Amazon. Great, you know. What's Amazon's corporate physical risk, Pauls? So there you'd have to ask, do they have contingency plans? Do they have access to insurance? And those are very key questions that associates do not ask on Wall Street. So I have called petrochemical plant, like LyondellBasell, the director of investor relations. I've called them on the phone and said, please send me a list of each of your facilities and their insurance policies for physical risk of climate change. Because their facilities are on the coast of Texas and Louisiana. They get hit by hurricanes, which is an acute risk, not a chronic risk. They're hit by sea level rise, which is a chronic risk. And those insurance policies may be renewed once a year. They may have been forgotten to be renewed. If they get hit, you might get a $300 million liability to the company, which occurred to one company on Hurricane Katrina. And those policies may state on how their coverage, it might state something like this, Sanhita. Oh, yes, LyondellBasell, you need to maintain a 10-foot berm or barrier around of earth around the facility. Does this make sense? Those are the type of questions to ask an associate. You following along? Great. Those are advanced climate finance questions that people don't ask. I already went, we'll skip this slide because we're running out of time. Always run out of time. Yeah, oh no, yeah, we're running out of time. One thing you need to know about is that we can then take that type of modeling we went through and then forecast that forward from a portfolio perspective, Sanhita. So we can say, okay, how do I transition my portfolio of 100 companies I've invested in to a net zero future? And the key thing to understand is not the math. Step up a level and understand the modeling criteria. And that there are different models. B, there's not a correct model. There's sort of some wrong models, but they're not really a correct model. So some models are much worse, but then there's generally a category of fairly good models. And what are the distinction in the models? Some models will say, okay, we need to decarbonize cement in 2028. Well, so they'll accept that transition cost at an earlier point than say, we want to decarbonize cement in 2032. So in other words, what's the cost to having 4 more years of cement production at standard emission rates versus decarbonization? They do a cost benefit analysis to make those decisions. So the models are different that way. They also make very different assumptions around how much carbon we can capture, either using carbon capture and storage or carbon capture utilization and storage, because you can capture carbon and turn it into limestone bricks, or direct air capture. And right now, the only way we can meet 1.5 degrees Celsius, which is almost impossible, sadly, is through carbon capture and storage, carbon capture utilization and storage, or direct air capture. So we are going to get to 2 degrees Celsius, and we're probably going to blow through 2 degrees Celsius. And at 2 degrees Celsius, no, the modeling suggests the neighbor of hundreds of millions of people dying. We're seeing.
Could you
Go ahead, Russell.
Sorry, Gabriel. Could you explain what is carbon capture?
Yes. Okay. I have a natural gas plant. Right, plant with a big chimney.
Mhm.
And instead of letting the natural gas go out into the Earth's atmosphere, I put it back into the ground,
Oh, okay.
into a cavern, like maybe 1,000 feet or 2,000 feet below ground.
Got it. And then how do you kind of recirculate that, or like
No,
where
it's
does I'm sorry?
it's blocked, it's capped in perpetuity.
Okay.
You're burying that carbon dioxide is trash, and we're burying it in the Earth's crust. It's the best way to think of it.
Okay.
In
All
shorthand.
right, thanks.
And there has been some success in very specific circumstances, but there's been no general success, because the success depends on infrastructure in place, taxes and incentives, and of course the geology. So some of the Norwegian oil and gas fields have had carbon capture and storage success, but many other places around the world have had very little or no success. And having been in this space for 20 years, Russell, every 5 to 7 years, it comes out, oh, we have this great new technology, carbon capture and storage. And I'm just going, it's like the same thing all over again. I'm from Minnesota, and the Minnesota Vikings are never going to win the Super Bowl ever. If you know. So, and Stephen, we lived there for a while. I mean, they're never going to win. It's like every year, every couple of years, yeah, they're going to win again. No, they're not. It's a marketing story. But what's important to understand beyond the jokes there is when you look at these decarbonization paths, they have a set of assumptions. You see this on the top right here. 2030, 6% of global car sales are electric. Okay. Yet we do have examples of decarbonization happening. Again, these slides, Stephen, I'll send the slides in PDF and you can distribute. But just top line, whoops, Germany saw its emissions go to its lowest level in 70 years last year. Oh, God, sorry about that. I'm making a mess of this. Okay. So you can decarbonize the countries, and it is happening, right? So when in this field, it's incredibly important to speak to and use facts. God, I'm making a mess of this. Okay, can I go on to some ESG history for a bit here? Okay. So Sanhita, because you nodded and I can see you nodding. How old is ESG as an acronym?
5 years.
5 years. I love it. Okay. Pasang, how old is ESG as an acronym? There are no right or wrong answers. We're just trying to have a conversation. So
Well, on the screen it says 200, but I I was in the finance industry, and prior to ESG, they were saying 3 Ps. And this was back in 2015. So I felt like ESG kind of came up in more like 2018.
Okay.
So
Okay,
yeah.
good. Stephen, do you know?
I don't know the exact time it's getting formed, but I think I'd agree with the others that like ESG is just really in the last 15 years or so really becoming a big deal.
Okay. The acronym ESG was born in 2004. Okay. It was a United Nations report co-written by Goldman Sachs and others. But that's an acronym. So within ESG, there's going to be like 2,000 metrics. Some metrics are very new, like does the company have a DEI policy? Yes, no. Okay, that's binary. Yes, that's very new. But another metric like report the number of board members comes from 1811. Okay, so many of the metrics in ESG, like in the governance pillar, number of governance, that's a pillar. Like think of number of people in the board of directors, tenure of auditor, average age of board of director members. Those go back 100 years plus. Have you heard, Will, of the book Securities Analysis by Graham and Dodd? You can just nod, lie to me. You can lie to me. Oh yeah, you were reading it last night, right? Yeah. Excellent. I love it. Well, okay, well, but I'm not going to say what it said because you're like, whatever, Gabrielle, shut up. But Securities Analysis is by Graham and Dodd, and it was published in 1934. And they were analysts in Wall Street, very successful. From them was born Berkshire Hathaway and others, right? Warren Buffett. Their book is all about the need for the strengthening of data governance and of having more transparency on governance metrics. So if one reads their book, you'll see specific metric, and you wash away current jargon, replace that with jargon from 100 years ago. They're using ESG metrics in that book. So ESG is quite old. Think of ISO 9000. Anybody know what ISO 9000 is? Pasang, I'm going to ask you. Okay, no, okay. ISO 9000. And I'm always get my ISOs confused, but I think that's the one for supply chain social metrics for safety for supply chains. That actually came out, that metric concept was born in a Department of Defense report in 1959 by DARPA and was published in 1987. Okay, so the metrics in ESG are old. So Rossell, when was the first a fund, ESG fund in the United States?
I don't know,
Right.
2010?
No, top right to the screen.
Oh. Oh, right.
Why don't you
one
read it to
second.
everybody?
First public screen fund, 1928?
No, 1898.
1898. Okay.
What does it say?
Quakers Friends Fiduciary sets up no alcohol, tobacco, weapons policy.
Yeah, they did. The Quakers had zero policies on cotton, sourcing cotton from zero slave labor in the United States in the 1820s. So, Barika, do you see when did proxy voting become a democratic, like a democratic concept for equated with we're a democracy and everyone gets one vote per share, and that became a movement in the United States. It's on this screen. It's in top middle. I doubt you would ever have heard of this.
1934.
1820s.
Oh yeah.
1820s. Yeah, at that time in the Commonwealth of Virginia, for a company, think about this, up to 15 shares, you got one vote per share. For the next 5 shares, up to 100, you got one vote. So if you have 15 shares, Barika, how many votes do you get?
You got 15 votes.
Right. And let's say I have 25 shares, how many do I get?
You get 25.
No, 17. Because for each unit of 5 more shares, you get only 1 vote.
Oh, because they were like, some
Promoting,
shares have like superpower shares, like
they wanted to
well, that's
promote
what they've been
minority
doing
ownership.
recently.
Minority, not referring to ethnicity, but or race, but minority referring to ownership.
No,
Yeah.
I know. I mean, like, a lot of the
Mhm.
tech companies, and now like Zuckerberg has like superpower voting. So like one of
They
his
do.
shares is like
Correct.
10. Yeah.
Yeah. In the 1950s, 1 share per vote became a right-wing Republican a sort of media item. Yeah. So these concepts are old and they're embedded in our democracy in the United States, for better or worse. Right? Is there any questions about this? So when was ESG an acronym, Sanhita?
2004.
Wonderful. Great job. Round of applause. Wonderful. Thank you for having fun with me on this very esoteric concept, but it helps them understand the nature of this industry. The industry is very old. The ESG process you can see mapped out here. You can just read across the top. These are just illustrative images, but understand metrics, scores, pillars, and ratings are different. A metric is binary. It's a percent. It's a unit. So Stephen, a metric would be scope 1 emissions for Stephen Snyder LLC, 200.2 tons in over 2022. I mean 200.2 metric tons carbon dioxide, or whatever the unit is there. I need to determine materiality with stakeholders, or double materiality, which is both materiality to stakeholders and financial materiality. Because one of the confusing concept about concepts in ESG is, so Will, let's say we're Exelon, we talked about earlier, an Exxon nuclear reactor has a spill, very small spill, and it only destroys your house, no one else's house, right? You're like, what the heck? Your neighbors, they're just fine, but your house is covered in nuclear waste. It's a scientific miracle. No one else is impacted, right? And well, is that material to you? What do you
Yeah.
think? Yeah.
Uh, material to me. But I mean, if I
Is
live
that material
around
to
the
Exelon?
nuclear,
Yeah.
I guess if I live around their nuclear plant, I feel like I would be like a stakeholder somehow because I'm like,
You'd be a stakeholder. That's right.
yeah,
But is that only your house is destroyed? That's material to you. But
yeah,
only a single house being destroyed, is that material to Exelon?
no.
So how do you,
Um,
so you have to have policies and strategies and underlying math and processes around determining materiality. And it's different in the United States legally than it is in the EU.
I think it's also kind of like looking at the climate versus the weather thing. So like obviously this happens at a macro level where certain communities are built on super funds, but the communities outside of them are not impacted. However, in the long run, the impacts are like this lowers the labor, human capital, because they can't work because they're sick,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
thus, it does have longer impacts. Is there a way to measure that, or is that kind of
Yeah,
built in
that's a
to the
concept
measurement?
called, there are many ways to measure that. One way that I'm familiar with, but there's gonna be others, is called contagion, right? Or knock-on effects, how impact, a community in, a specific, Will, your house gets destroyed. Will, now you go, and Sanhita lives next to you. You just moved the whole family. You have like 15 kids. You're gonna live on the front lawn. And Sanhita's like, what? Sanhita has this beautiful lawn. It's been manicured. Like, hey, we're pitching tents. Have a barbecue out there. You invited me over. I bring my kids. You know, that's where, you have contagion, but unfortunately in the United States, that's not well addressed. And we have, when that is done at scale, we have concepts around like Cancer Alley, which are further discussed in the PowerPoint here, where you have, in some communities in the United States, the background cancer rates are 50, like 50 times greater than other parts of the United States. Yet we have a difficulty scientifically to prove, is that literally because of the excess toxic releases, toxic chemical releases due to the petrochemical industry, or is it just other reasons? It's very difficult to cause and effect. I got cancer. Is it because I drank benzene by accident at the petrochemical plant, or was I because I was smoking cigarettes? You know, it doesn't help when someone dies. They're still dead. Or it doesn't help with the bills or the lost wages. Which we'll talk a little bit more. There's some more slides on this we're not going to get through today, but they're at the end of the deck, okay? So there are many different ways of looking at ESG, and here, okay, these are just some cases. I just want to point out that we have a lot of cases, we have a bunch of cases on our website that you can look at, and including on Noble Group, which is the company on the left. What you need to understand, the sole takeaway here is that ESG, you can see it in the financial numbers. So Pasang, you can see ESG in cost of goods sold. Okay. Sanhita, you can see ESG in property, plant, and equipment on the balance sheet. Will, you can see, you need to learn to understand, you can see ESG in inventory turnover. Okay. Which if you want to do another meeting, we can do that. I could talk through these examples because I'm running out of time. Because the next slide is the most important slide of the deck, and Stephen knows the values, interests, career, and job, okay? But the example, the one on the left, I led a team, we calculated of a financial accountant and I, we looked at Noble Group, we spent maybe $10,000 of time and effort and pay on this. We demonstrated that the company was lying about its financial accounting over 4 years, because we saw the impact of the biodiversity and deforestation risk, and which would be counted as carbon emissions under ESG from the forest that they were clear cutting. It was 200,000 acres in eastern Indonesia in a biodiverse rich area. We present our updated financial numbers. I did to the CFO. They issued an $80 million impairment. The company then went bankrupt. So you can translate ESG, or more broadly sustainability metrics, into financial numbers. That's the art that we need to turn into a science to really make an incredible impact on companies. They will listen then, okay? And this case is from 2017. The other cases are much earlier. Lumber Liquidators is 2013. Here. So we're going to pause for a second, pretend that you've gone to break, you've had some coffee, you've called your parents, whatever you're doing. We're going to talk very briefly about a model that I teach people on how to think about their lives around this space, okay? So, Will, your family and friends probably ask you what job you're going to get, right? Please don't ever answer that question. Turn it around on them. Say, well, you know, what I really value communities, and I value conservation, and so I'm interested in, I'm going from the top bottom. I'm interested in sustainable business and community development. So my career is going to be as an impact, and my career is going to be an impact. Choose a sector, and sustainability. The job, well, whatever. I have a job for this job, I have that job, but the third job or the fourth job, nobody cares. Turn that around. Because I noticed so many graduate students and you know, mid-age professionals like me, or even older people, get so stressed out. What's my job? When someone asks me about that, I'm like, really? You haven't thought through it. Nobody cares. What are your values? So remember, what did I do in 1980s? I raised money and bought an ambulance, right? Hassan, what did I do in the 1990s?
I think you were in the ocean.
Yeah, oceanographic research, analyzing plastics and biodiversity, right? So what's my career since 2006, Sanhita?
In finance?
No, sustainable finance research manager, right? And Roselle, what jobs have I had?
Several within everything that you mentioned.
Right. Because the job is whoever's paying me that day, right? So I've worked for National Wildlife Federation. I've worked for the USAID. I've consulted to Interpol, okay, the law enforcement agency with a bunch of spooks and spies. Who cares? You know? So I do sustainable finance. That's my career based on those values and interests. So when someone comes to work for us, whether they're an intern or an executive, the first assignment they must complete in their probation period is to write out their values, interests, career, job model. Okay. Any questions? That values, interests, career, jobs will help you tremendously in your career. So think of what do you value? What are you interested in? That's your career. Your job, you're going to have lots of jobs in your life. Okay. So lots of comments here. Great.
Yeah, it was a quite engaging conversation as well. Gabriel, I mean, does anyone have any questions or would like to go over things? I know one thing that I really like about you bringing this in, this value, interest, career, jobs model, is also just a way for us to think broadly about like what impact are we trying to create with finance? And it's a topic that comes up repeatedly from other speakers. It's a different way to look at it, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Well, for us, the impact we want is our tagline, and this is written in our corporate charter. So we're a C corporation. It's a type of corporation out of Delaware, but within that, we're a specific category called public benefit, and that's with a public benefit statement. So we only help institutions on their transition paths of low carbon, sustainable, and equitable future. Right. Just saw Will. I saw your comment on SASB. Those are metrics which some institutions use or don't use. It's a bit. They're helpful because they're specific to sub industries, but so ESG is also specific to sub industries. Like oil and gas exploration has a specific subcategory of ESG metrics under Bloomberg, which can be different than paper packaging. Yeah. You can have an enormous impact in this space. The Norwegian government pension fund stopped investing in some companies because of my analysis. No, that's what you do.
I do have a quick question about you said that at one point you were doing banking and kind of energy, petrol. So I'm curious kind of what your thought process was when you were initially going in that route in terms of kind of your values and interests.
It was so stressful. It was miserable.
Yeah.
It was 2001, 2002. I was trading Fed funds, overnight interest between banks, and we do about 4 billion a day. And I was also lending about $300 million a day. And first of all, I get maybe up to 100, 150 phone calls and be like this. And I have my right hand to do the trades, by my left hand, or I'm on my little tiny screen at a couple of monitors. I'm a little tiny screen. I'd have I'd be filling out National Resource Defense Council long form letters to regulators to try and protect areas in the United States. I was like, I mean, because functionally what happens in finance, it's a 1% versus 99%. All of you have made the wrong choice, fundamentally. You're part of the 1%. You want to be innovative. Okay. You're already studying under Stephen. And you're having entertaining conversations with me. You've made the wrong set of choices. Because 99% of the people in finance do the same thing for the rest of their lives. I have a colleague who has done collateralized loan obligations for 30 plus years. That's all he's ever done. I've designed carbon offset projects for indigenous leaders and worked in Australia with companies to protect rare rainforests and etc. No, I chose that 1% path. So that 1% path of innovation requires it's important to go through a values, interests, career, jobs matrix to create a baseline way of protecting, or creating security for oneself. Functionally pay off your student loans, have as little debt as possible, that type of thing, so that you're able to then weather the variability that will happen on the career. On the banking side, there was no interest, even to today. I have a friend whose title is head of model risk and climate risk for a very large, globally sustainably important bank, GSIB bank. He cannot He reports to the board of, he reports to his boss, who's the chief risk officer, he reports to the board of directors. He's covering climate. His bankers will not accept his phone call. They literally do not reply to his phone call because they're oil and gas bankers. So you know, you're already taking a sustainable finance class. You've sort of gone down that path. And once you know that you can have impact in this space, you know, would I do it all over again the same way? I would, you can never map out your jobs. It's very difficult to map out your career, but boy, I have made a global impact. I can see from space my graduate student project. It's 500,000 acres of rainforest that's protected in Indonesia. I designed that with 2 friends in grad school. I can see it from space. You can go online right now and look up Katingan. And then I have my next call, so I'm gonna have to go. But so pick what you want to do.
Thank you so much, Gabriel. I think that's an encouraging way to leave it. I know you said you have another call, but yeah, all of the information in your presentation is also super useful. So I know the fellows will get to enjoy reading through that.
We hire interns. Join us if you want. If you have more questions, let us know. And thank you. It's a real pleasure and real honor to be here. Really grateful for all of your time. Okay. Thank you, Stephen.
Yeah, thanks so much. Take care. Have a good evening. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.